Hello, this is Norre talking to himself on his phone again. I'm about to talk to myself on the computer, in the computer, um, to tell you, if you're interested, about how I used in the Innocence soundtrack 5 different variations of the same theme to score maybe close to half of the film. I want to tell you how I did it and how me being that lazy actually maybe benefits the soundtrack and the film itself. Let me show you. Hey everyone, so what I've got here in front of me are the 5 different variations of the opening theme for Innocence, the main theme really for Innocence. And it starts in the very beginning of the film. The first sound you hear in the film is this music right here. So, what we've got is a very simple 4 chord motif played on the solo violin, arpeggiated violin chords played so beautifully by Sigrun Harðardóttir. These 4 chords are super simple. We're in A minor. We've got A minor in the second inversion, so where the fifth is in the bass, and then we've got F major, and then we've got F major in the first inversion where the third is in the bass, and then we've got C major in the second inversion. So A minor, F major, C major. Very, very simple, simplistic, purposefully so. This is music for children, about children. It's supposed to be playful, naive, but of course there's a hint, more than a hint, of melancholy in there as well. And I'm going to tell you exactly where I stole this chord progression from, and I didn't have to look far. If you have listened to some of my previous music, I have a track called Höstar. It's from my EP, piano and string EP called Landbrot. Höstar starts like this. If you're like me and you judge myself really hard, like I do most of the time, let's be honest, you're absolutely right too. This is blatant borrowing, stealing, whatever you want to call it. But when you're scoring films, you're often very, very short on time. So you take what you get wherever you get it from. And at least it's better that I take it from myself than anyone else. So this is where the inspiration for that particular chord progression comes from. But of course, it's a very different vibe, very different mood. We've got these slow, low piano chords here, and then we've got the very more faster paced violin arpeggios. And then the first variation of that opening theme that we hear in the soundtrack is in the track Becoming Beasts, which starts like this. So again, a little different. I do evolve and develop the chords a little more as the song goes on, but still it starts with the same A minor, F major. So a little variation, completely different scene. This is further along in the film. It's a training sequence for soldiers to be teenagers training on a beach. So it's quite, yeah, it's a little training montage. hence the sort of very steady rhythmic tempo of this. And then the next variation where we hear this theme is from this track, The Girl in the Dark. This is one of my favorite pieces of music on the soundtrack. This particular variation is closer to the violin arpeggios in the beginning. It's the arpeggiated piano this time, but it's slightly slower, it's slightly lower in pitch than the violin arpeggio that we heard in the beginning. Which gives it a much more melancholic feel, much sadder. There's much less playful than the opening variation, and it gets even slower and even lower in the next one, The Boy Without a Voice. If you know me, you know I like space in my music, but sometimes when I listen back to stuff that I've done, I feel like I'm in competition with myself for how much space I can get away with putting in between some of these phrases. That's a lot of space right here. This particular variation, we're continuing on the trend. We're following the arc of the film, really. It starts as children, soldiers to be, but before they know it in the beginning. So it's quite playful, it's innocent, and it gets darker and darker as the film progresses, as the children get older, as it dawns on them that they're going to have to serve in the military, and as they get closer to actually serving. So yeah, The Boy Without a Voice is even slower. It's still sort of arpeggiated, but much, much slower, and leaves so much space, like I said. And this leaves me with the very last variation, which is the track We See, We Know, We Don't Care, which is my absolute favorite one of these variations. It's the darkest one. It's the most disturbing one, and the final variation we hear in this film and on this arc towards this darkness. Let's see what we've got. Just a little bit of space. And if I fast forward a little bit, sorry, not to here, to here. we're hearing here is actually the very opening violin. Very simply pitched down and slowed down 2 octaves. So it's 2 octaves, so it's playing at a quarter of the speed that it is in the opening. Let's hear how it sounds again. Sorry, here we go. So I'm very literally slowing things down. The actual sound of the violin, that's just it. Slow down, pitch down. Sounds like that. This is my absolute favorite variation and one of my favorite tracks on the soundtrack, if not the favorite. And I'm gonna do a quick deep dive of it in just a minute. So stay tuned if you're interested in that. Before we get into that, I want to show you another thing that ties all of these variations together, or most of them, is this secondary melody that I put on top of this chord progression. And we can hear it in the opening variation here. In that top violin. Just a very simple 3-note theme, 6-note theme. It changes a little bit depending on the variation. Here we hear it in Becoming Beasts. Like I said, just like a slight variation. It still reminds us of that theme in the beginning. We should still be able to recognize it, even though it's not exactly the same. The Girl in the Dark, we can hear it here. Always in the violin. And The Boy Without a Voice, we hear it here in that long space in between. So yeah, just a little summary of how I used multiple variations of the same theme to sort of tie the film together. And I find this a really useful tool to build a connection with the audience. Repetition in and of itself is so useful. And you know, it's like when you're listening to a new album for the first time and you might like it, but you can't really put your finger on it. It's not until you listen to it for the second or the third time that you really start sort of getting into it. And with films, we just have like 90 minutes maybe to build this type of connection, and variations of the same theme is such a powerful tool to do just that. So when that theme hits again, even though if it's in a slight variation, the audience already has some sort of connection to it, even though it might be subconscious, but it's still, there's some sort of connection to it, and it helps just build the emotion to it. Another thing that it does is, for example, this film is it's somewhat linear, but it's somewhat not. And a lot of the times we're watching images of, for example, children today, living children, but we're hearing simultaneously diary readings from deceased soldiers from way before. So we're not really sure what to focus on. Are we focusing on the images? Are we focusing on the words that we're hearing? Of course, they relate to each other in some way, but having some sort of musical ribbon to tie it together, it really helps glue it all together and make it one cohesive, one cohesive work of art, which is absolutely what this film is. Right. We know, we don't care. Is a title taken directly from the film itself, like all of these titles. And for me personally, it encapsulates very much how I feel about the state of the world right now, sadly. Right, so let's open up and see what we've got here. I touched a little bit up on this pitched down arpeggio. Let's listen to it just solo. So like I said, I pitched it, I slowed it down, I also put a little distortion on it, and some saturation, and more importantly, I'm panning it quite hard, as you can see, in different directions, so it's moving. And, sorry, let me mute all this thing here, and then I can play the entire track. So I'm just playing around with the stereo placement of the arpeggio. It starts a little bit left, goes further towards the center, and then goes left again, and so on. It helps. Listen, it's been 3 years since I wrote the soundtrack, and I'm trying to explain why I did what I did. I don't remember. I'm playing around with the panning because it's fun, because it made me feel like this disturbing element. Is this good enough after explaining? I don't know. If this disturbing element is somewhat traveling around us, I guess, and it works really well in that context, I think. It's been 3 years. Let's move on. The first sound that you hear here actually is this little synthy sound. That's actually not a synth, but I'm going to play it to you anyway. So again, the same chord progression as before. This sound is my go-to way of sound designing, really. This is a recording of viola. You don't recognize it when you listen to this, but it's just a sustained viola note that from, I think, one of the tracks on my first album, Orbit. And I took it, mapped it on the keyboard, and manipulated it in all kinds of ways. And then this is me just playing the chords with that one single sample on that keyboard. What it does when you just take a single note and map it onto the keyboard, it means that the higher you go on the keyboard, the faster the sample is playing, and the lower you go, the slower it's playing. And if you're trying to make something really realistic, you don't want to do that. You want to take you want to make multiple samples in different pitches and then map it that way onto the keyboard. But I honestly like when I'm just trying to make cool sounds in sound design. I find it very, very useful to make a difference between them, to have what's higher in pitch, it sounds faster, and what's lower in pitch sounds slower, and that to me makes so much sense too. So yeah, I quite like this viola patch that I made here, viola synth patch. And yes, if we continue to play through the song, let's just listen to everything together. Here we got the arpeggios come in on top of the viola patch. The synth patch is gonna die out, and we've got the string orchestra and the solo viola just droning. You can solo these elements. Here's the solo viola, here's the string orchestra, the same note, and then we've got a solo cello drone. Is traveling within the stereo placement. And the orchestra is growing. And here we've got some basses, we've got some sub, we've got this noisy bass here. And we've got an even lower, more subtle bass right here. If you're watching this on your phone, you're not hearing that, I guarantee. And the orchestra is growing. Got a little boom. I'm gonna stop here just to tell you a little bit. Of course, this is I'm scoring a scene here. What's happening in this scene during this build is we're heading towards graduation, where it's soldiers in training who have graduated and are now ready to join the military. And meanwhile we hear diary readings of soldiers who committed suicide during their service. Read how much they are dreading this moment from their actual diaries. So it's a very dark moment, and when the boom hits here, is when this group of graduating soldiers all throw their hats up in the air to celebrate. And it's sort of, I felt the role of the music here was to go in the complete opposite direction of what we're seeing on screen. And it makes for a very, very powerful sequence, I think, in my very humble, non-biased opinion, of course. And then we switch a little gears. I'm not going to talk you through the entire scene, but we switch characters in who is reading, basically, and it gets much softer. We need to calm down. And then I keep this low bass, and I have the orchestra droning a little bit just on the fundamental, and then bring out this chord progression. Solo viola on top, in the spaces in between. And this is what I love about space in music. Look at how useful this space is for this melody in the viola. bass is dying down. Barely hear the bass anymore, just the orchestra and the viola. I'd forgotten about this actually. So in the film itself, it ends on this very somber, very straight deadpan high violin drone on the fundamental. But in the soundtrack album, I decided just to end on the viola on this note right here. And that is pretty much it. I got myself going here. I kind of want to talk about what's happening in the chords here in the string orchestra because I'm quite fond of it. And speaking of variations, this is actually a variation on a theme that's introduced earlier in the film. It's not actually, it didn't make it onto the soundtrack album. And it's, let me see if I can find it for you. I will cut to you in a little bit. And look at that, here I am. Found the piece of music from the original score where these chords are introduced for the first time. It's actually in a sequence where Q, as we call it, that comes right after the Girl in the Dark track. And yeah, but this time it's played on the synth. It's actually on the same synth viola patch thingy that the we see we know we don't care track is played with. It sounds like this. There's no solo viola to fill up the space. And we're in a different key, but very much the same chords. Now if you go back to we see, we know, we don't care, listen to the chords here. And again, if you're watching the film, you probably are not noticing that, oh, these are the same chords as in that scene an hour ago. No, but subconsciously you might feel it, and that makes it stronger. Hence why I do it. Also because I'm a lazy shit. Harmonically speaking, what's happening here, I've got there are 3 notes at play. I'm not gonna go analyze it or anything, but just to tell you the interplay between the orchestra and the viola, there are 3 notes in these chords. And And it's the same chord that just rises one step at a time. 3-note chord. But the thing is, these are actually mostly 4-note chords, but the orchestra is missing one note. Where's the 4th note? It's in the viola. So when the viola comes in, it's holding the missing tone from the chord in the string swells here. For example, this chord right here, this is an F major 7 chord with the A in the bass, so again with the 3rd in the bass. So we've got the orchestra is playing A, F, and E, so the 3rd, the tonic, and the 7th, but we're missing the 5th, the C, but the 5th is here in the viola. The viola is playing the C. Here, it goes up to the C, and then that fills up this chord. The same thing happens next time around. We've got a G7 chord with the 3rd in the bass. We're missing the 5th again, but it's in the viola. So yeah, that was We See, We Know, We Don't Care, one of my favorite tracks from the Innocence soundtrack. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to hear more, go check out the soundtrack. It would mean so much to me if you did. It's out everywhere you listen to music. It's out on Moderna Records. Please go watch the film. I cannot state highly enough how much this film means to me, particularly in these very distressing times. It's an incredible film, and I'm so proud to have been part of it. Go watch it. There's a link to both the soundtrack and the film in the description. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.